The Sea of Japan does not forgive errors of attention. It is a body of water that looks from a chart like a manageable enclosed basin between two coastlines that have been at peace for decades. But the chart does not show the thermal layering that scrambles sonar returns in the spring months, when cold deep water meets the warmer surface current flowing northeast from the Korean Strait and creates acoustic environments that have defeated more capable systems than the ones currently tracking the contact. The chart does not show the background biological noise from the squid fishing fleets that operate in the Central Basin every night from February through May, generate an acoustic clutter at frequencies uncomfortably close to the diesel-electric signature that the P-8 crew overhead has been chasing for the last 6 hours. And the chart does not show what is at the northern end of the contact's projected track, where the deep water shelf edges toward the shipping lanes that feed the ports of northern Japan, where a vessel capable of the weapons payload that the intelligence assessment describes would have, within approximately 11 hours, the geometry to do something that no one in any of the relevant command structures wants to contemplate in anything other than the abstract. The contact had been designated and tracked for 31 hours before the decision was made to escalate the response posture from surveillance to active interdiction. 31 hours of passive tracking by a combination of assets that had been operating in this basin for reasons that, officially, had nothing to do with each other. A maritime patrol aircraft on a scheduled transit. A research vessel whose published mission profile involved oceanographic sampling in the Central Basin. And, at depth, running silent on a track that had been maintained without a single active sonar emission for the entirety of the contact's transit. A fast attack submarine whose position in these waters was not acknowledged in any document that would survive a standard classification review. The P-8 crew had been the first to mark the anomaly. The acoustic sensor operator had been running his array across the Central Basin for 4 hours when he noticed the pattern that would, in retrospect, be the first thread in the contact's unraveling. He had not flagged it immediately. Experienced operators develop a working relationship with the acoustic environment of their assigned basins, a relationship built from hundreds of hours of exposure to the specific mix of biological, geological, and commercial noise that characterizes each body of water at each season of the year. That relationship produces an instinct, not always articulable, for when a pattern belongs to the environment and when it does not quite fit. The acoustic sensor operator's instinct said the pattern he was looking at did not quite fit. He spent 40 minutes refining his analysis before he said anything to the mission commander. When he did, he framed it carefully. Not a contact, not a designation, but an anomaly worth watching. The mission commander agreed. They kept watching. What had initially appeared on the P-8's passive acoustic array as a biologics contact, a pattern that experienced operators had almost written off as a large cetacean or a school of fish moving in unusual density, had revealed itself over the course of 4 hours of careful analysis as something else entirely. The pattern was too regular. The frequency signature had the specific spectral distribution of a propulsion plant operating at very low power, below the threshold at which most acoustic databases would flag it as mechanical, but consistent, when the analysis team ran it against a specialized library that did not exist in standard operational references, with a class of vessel that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea had been developing and testing for several years according to intelligence assessments that were not widely circulated outside a narrow compartment of the relevant commands. It was a submarine. It was small by the standards of fleet submarines, but small did not mean limited in the specific way that mattered here. Small meant it could operate in water depths that larger vessels could not reach. Small meant its acoustic signature was harder to separate from biological clutter, and the intelligence assessment of what this class of vessel had been designed to carry in its forward tube configuration, the assessment that had been revised upward in specificity and confidence over the preceding 14 months, meant that small, in this context, was a variable that needed to be resolved before it became irrelevant. The authorization package had come through at 9:14 p.m. The commanding officer of the fast attack submarine, running at depth 40 nautical miles north of the contact's last confirmed position, had read it and then run the intercept geometry on his navigation plot for 12 minutes before arriving at the course and speed parameters that would bring his vessel into the correct engagement envelope within the required time window. The geometry was tight. The target was slow, but the tracking solution had uncertainties that compressed the engagement window more than the planning models had suggested. He noted this in his operational log with the precise, affectless language that operational logs require, and then he gave the orders that the geometry demanded. Below the surface, in the control room that was the operational center of the fast attack submarine, the crew had been living with the knowledge of this contact for 26 of its 31 hours. The sonar supervisor had maintained his watch rotation with an intensity that his relief operators could feel as a physical presence in the compartment. The contact solution was maintained on a dedicated display that no one touched without authorization, and everyone watched with the continuous peripheral attention of people who understood that what was on that display was the reason they were in this basin. The smell in the control room was the particular mix of recycled air, human effort, and the faint electrical note of systems running at sustained high utilization that characterizes a submarine crew operating at the sustained pitch of an extended tracking operation. Nobody was tired in the way that produces errors. Fatigue had been managed through a watch rotation that the commanding officer had personally designed to keep the most experienced personnel at their stations during the windows when the tracking solution was most likely to be tested. That management was itself a form of operational discipline, quiet and invisible from the outside, essential to the outcome. At 11:02 p.m., the fast attack submarine came to its new course and increased to the transit speed that the engagement geometry required. It was still running entirely on passive sensors. Not a single active emission had left its hull since it entered this basin. The sonar team was working with acoustic data that had been refined over 31 hours of passive collection, and the contact solution they were maintaining was as good as a passive solution could be, which meant it was good enough for the approach geometry and not quite good enough for the terminal engagement parameters that the weapon system would eventually require. The sonar supervisor had been describing this gap in the solution with the same measured language at every update interval, and the commanding officer had been noting it with the same measured acknowledgement, and both of them understood that the gap existed and that the approach phase was designed to close it before the engagement phase required it to be closed. At 11:31 p.m., the contact changed behavior. The acoustic signature shifted. The propulsion plant, which had been running at the same low-power steady state for the entirety of the tracked transit, reduced its output further. It did not stop. It stepped down, the way a careful operator steps down a throttle when approaching a condition that requires precision. The sonar supervisor held up a single finger, and the control room went from its operational quiet to a different kind of quiet. The kind that has a specific texture to it, a texture made of held breath and the conscious suppression of any movement that might add noise to the acoustic environment at a moment when every decibel of ambient interference was an enemy. The contact was slowing, more than slowing. At the rate of the power reduction the sonar supervisor was observing, the contact would reach a near-stationary hover state within approximately 8 minutes. He passed this assessment to the commanding officer in a voice so controlled it carried no weight beyond the information it contained. The information it contained was heavy enough on its own. Submarines hover for specific reasons. They hover to conduct a careful acoustic search of the surrounding environment before transiting a shallow water threshold. They hover to take a careful fix on their navigation position using passive methods before the water depth no longer allows the depth margin they need. They hover to prepare a weapon system for employment. Not all of those reasons produce the same operational response requirement. The intelligence assessment and the contact's current position, cross-referenced against the shipping lane geometry that the fast attack submarine's navigator had been tracking since the Intercept course was set, eliminated 2 of the 3 possibilities from serious consideration. The contact was not at a shallow water threshold. Its navigation fix problem, given the acoustic environment and the time it had been at sea, was not urgent enough to justify slowing at this position. It was preparing to do something. The commanding officer had planned for this contingency. He had not expected it to arrive this quickly or at this position, which placed the contact in a geometry that was not the engagement geometry his targeting solution had been built around. The planned engagement called for an approach from the contact's port quarter, exploiting an acoustic shadow created by the contact's own propulsion noise. The contact's current position put its port quarter in a depth band that compressed the fast attack submarine's available approach route to a corridor with less margin than the commanding officer would have chosen if he were choosing freely. He was not choosing freely. He was choosing within the geometry that existed, and the geometry that existed had a narrow window. Before whatever the contact was preparing to do moved from preparation to activation, he called for the revised targeting solution and got it in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The solution had higher uncertainty than the planned solution. The navigator said so directly, and the commanding officer heard it, and he took 30 seconds to consider the implications of higher uncertainty in this specific context, before he reached a conclusion that the situation had already been reaching toward on his behalf. He gave the order for the active sonar pulse. 1 pulse. 1 clear, sharp, active sonar emission lasting less than 2 seconds that would announce the fast attack submarine's presence to every vessel in a significant radius and would eliminate all uncertainty from the targeting solution simultaneously. 1 pulse that would also, by its nature, tell the contact that it had been found, had been tracked, and was now inside the engagement envelope of a vessel that had chosen to make itself known at this specific moment, for a reason that any experienced submarine commander would understand immediately. The pulse went out at 11:47 p.m. The return came back in the fraction of a second that the physics of water and sound required. The targeting solution updated. The uncertainty bars collapsed to a number that the weapons officer could work with, and the contact's acoustic signature changed again, immediately and dramatically. The propulsion plant, surging from its near-stationary hover state to a power output that the sonar supervisor described in a single word that conveyed everything necessary about what was happening on the other end of that acoustic return. The contact was running, not toward the shipping lanes, not toward any offensive geometry. Away. At maximum power, cavitating at a rate that made it acoustically visible to every sensor in the basin, running on a course that the navigator identified within 90 seconds as a direct track toward the deepest water in the northern basin, where the bottom topography would give a fleeing submarine the best chance of breaking contact and surviving into another day. It was the response of a commander who understood, in the moment the active pulse reached his hull, that the calculation had changed, and that the changed calculation had only one rational response. The commanding officer had expected the contact to run. He had not expected the additional development that his electronic warfare operator reported 45 seconds after the contact began its evasion. A transmission. Encrypted, burst format. The same architecture used by the DPRK Naval Command Network for emergency situation reports. The contact was reporting its situation to someone, and the bearing of the transmission's relay bounce, processed through the electronic warfare suite in the 7 seconds it took the burst to complete, pointed not toward the Korean coastline, but toward a position in the central basin that had a vessel in it, the research vessel. The fast attack submarine's intelligence officer pulled the research vessel's filed transit notification from the database in his terminal and ran it against the position the electronic warfare suite had identified. The vessel was where its notification said it would be, but the notification said it was conducting oceanographic sampling. Oceanographic sampling vessels do not receive encrypted military burst transmissions routed through Naval Command relay architectures. The research vessel was not what its paperwork said it was, and it had just received a report from a vessel that was currently being tracked by an asset that it did not know was in the basin. The mission had just acquired a complication that was not in the authorization package. The commanding officer transmitted an urgent update to the coordination node through the fast attack submarine's extremely low-frequency communication suite. He described the situation in the compressed, specific language that the communications architecture required. He included the research vessel's position, the transmission bearing, and his assessment of the situation in 3 sentences. He then continued executing the primary mission while waiting for the coordination node's response, because the primary mission's window was not waiting for the situation to be administratively resolved. The contact was at maximum speed on its evasion course. It was loud, and it was visible, and it was moving toward deep water that would give it options it currently did not have. The engagement window was approximately 9 minutes before the contact reached a depth and distance combination that would begin to degrade the targeting solution back toward the uncertainty levels that had preceded the active pulse. 9 minutes was sufficient time if it was used correctly. The coordination node's response arrived at 11:54 p.m. It addressed the research vessel situation in 2 words. It addressed the primary mission in 1. The commanding officer nodded to the weapons officer. At 11:56 p.m., the weapon was away. It ran on a track that the targeting solution had computed, and the weapons officer had verified, and the commanding officer had authorized, and it ran at the speed that weapons of its type run, and it reached the intercept point in the time that the geometry had calculated it would reach the intercept point. The acoustic return of the intercept reached the fast attack submarine's sonar array 11 seconds after the weapon had done what it was designed to do. The sonar supervisor reported that the contact's acoustic signature had ceased. Then he reported the secondary acoustic event consistent with a pressure hull compromised at depth. Then he was quiet. No one in the control room said anything for approximately 30 seconds. The contact had not been a fleet submarine. It had not been a vessel capable of a sustained exchange with a fast attack submarine operating in its own element at full capability. But it had been a vessel that, 11 hours from now, without the intervention of the last 6 hours, would have had the geometry and the payload to alter a situation that multiple governments and command structures had assessed as requiring prevention. The prevention had been accomplished. At a cost measured in the hours of concentrated attention that 31 hours of passive tracking requires, in the active pulse that had revealed a presence that would now need to be acknowledged in at least some contexts, and in the discovery of an intelligence gap that had placed an unidentified adversary asset in the same basin without anyone knowing it was there. The research vessel had moved before the coordination node's secondary response assets reached its last known position. It had done what vessels do when they understand that the situation around them has resolved in a way that makes their continued presence complicated. It had moved. Its transponder signal had been reactivated 40 minutes after it had gone dark, and it was now transmitting a position that placed it outside the area of operational interest at a speed consistent with a vessel that had somewhere else to be and had been headed there for some time. The fiction of the transit notification had been restored. It would not be the last time a vessel in this basin made that particular choice, and it would not be the last time the assets tracking it made the choice to let the fiction stand rather than force a confrontation whose resolution would cost more than the intelligence value of resolving it. The fast attack submarine came to a reduced speed at 12:43 a.m. and began a passive survey of the engagement area. Standard procedure, confirmation of outcome, environmental assessment, log notation, and then a return to the course and speed and operational posture that its presence in these waters was supposed to represent. The sonar team conducted the survey with the same methodical attention they had maintained for 31 hours of tracking. The acoustic environment of the engagement area had changed in ways that were consistent with a single definitive event and no subsequent activity. There was nothing left to track. The survey was thorough because thorough is what the protocol required, and because thorough is what the crew of a vessel that has just done what this crew had just done owes to the certainty of the outcome. 30 minutes of passive survey. The basin was quiet in all the ways that mattered. The log would not reflect the engagement in any language that a standard records review would flag. It would reflect a transit, a routine presence. A vessel conducting its scheduled operational cycle in a basin where such cycles were normal and unremarkable. The crew would carry what had happened in the particular way that crews carry things they cannot discuss with anyone outside a compartment that most of the world does not know exists. They would carry it with the same professional discipline they had applied to every hour of the preceding 31. Which is to say, they would carry it correctly and without visible weight. The P-8 overhead had turned south at 11:48 p.m. and resumed its published transit track. Its acoustic data from the preceding 6 hours had been transmitted to the analysis facility in an encrypted package that would be received, assessed, and stored in a compartment that the vessel's official flight log would never reference. The oceanographic research vessel that had appeared in the P-8's radar picture for a portion of its transit was logged as a civilian contact, charted, and noted with no further characterization. The Sea of Japan looked exactly as it had at the beginning of the night. The squid fishing fleet worked the central basin under lights bright enough to be visible from the air. The shipping lanes carried their ordinary cargo north toward the ports whose names appeared in the transit notifications of 1,000 commercial vessels every week. The Weather Service recorded a calm night in the central basin with light winds from the northwest and a swell of less than 1 meter. The bottom of the northern basin was as it had been, except for one addition that no survey would document and no chart would ever show. 31 hours of passive tracking. 1 active sonar pulse. 9-minute engagement window. 0 acknowledged losses. The payload that had been 11 hours from optimal firing geometry was not arriving anywhere. Dominance in the deep is not measured in declarations. It is measured in contacts that were tracked, intercepted, and resolved, before the world above the surface had any reason to know the water was anything other than quiet. The sea does not announce what it has swallowed. It only moves on.